Welcome to TechRect. I'm your host, Alicia Kellstrom, with a background in B2B tech software and sales. I've spent the last few months exploring new opportunities, and along the way, I've had the privilege of meeting incredible people with fascinating experiences that I can't wait to share with you. Whether you're looking to break into tech, navigate tech tooling, or even coping with the hardship of layoffs, these stories will inspire, inform, and entertain you. Let's jump right in. Welcome to TechRect. I'm your host, Alicia Kellstrom, and today we are talking to Kent Cameron. I met Kent through a friend that I met on Lunch Club, which is like a networking website, and I was on their podcast last summer, Nearshore Cafe. And hello and welcome.
Nearshore Cafe, that's
amazing. Yeah, so I met Kent and Brian, shout out, hi Brian. And then we reconnected and I thought that Kent had a great story to share with everybody. So I asked him to be on the podcast. So welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Alicia. Great to be here. And yeah, happy to share and lean in on this challenging time, I guess, is one way to sort of put it. But also there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I think. And yeah, so maybe just a quick overview of me. You know, I'm a tech recruitment specialist. This is my first radio at all in understanding the space. So yeah, I think I can talk a little bit about it and hopefully, you know, it can be meaningful for those out there. But really, I've navigated like a full spectrum. Alicia, I think we've had, you know, some dialogue about this, but just a full spectrum of career highs and lows. You know, that's the quickest way I can put it across. And I think from my story is a story of, you know, being laid off, you know, in is it 2021? I think it was 2021, roughly. It's about 18 months ago. It feels like forever.
Yeah.
It felt like forever. And you kind of don't know how long the timeline is going to be. That's the most scariest thing about it. I'm sure that might resonate. But yeah, so I guess, you know, from my side, my story was reconnecting. My success story was reconnecting with a previous employer that laid me off. Interestingly enough, I now work for them just recently, 2 months ago. Yeah, re-engaged after all this time. And look, maybe I might start by saying I've got no silver bullet here, but I do understand the last 18 months intimately in the tech economy, if you want to call it, in the US and also across the world. Like I've been in Australia, Europe, US, and I've got, you know, a fairly good lens, I feel. So yeah, it's been certainly very challenging. My focus and specialism is working in data science, platform engineering, product development as a technical recruiter. So that might give you a bit of context.
Yeah, thank you. Usually we start with the like overview of your professional background and 30-second elevator pitch. So I think that covered that really well. And I love having your perspective from an HR recruiting lens, because most of everyone else is kind of like, what's happening? And we don't really know, but you have a very unique point of view and also can kind of pull back that curtain a little bit and give us a little more context to what we're experiencing, but also having experienced it yourself. And then a really amazing success story of boomeranging back to a previous employer, which I love that. That's so heartwarming and allows for a lot of hope. I think with these stories, we have a lot of people that are just struggling and really having a hard time coping. And I like that we can talk about positive stories that give us all hope. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I hope it helps because there are some good positive stories out there, you know. So yeah, just leveraging on that point, Alicia, around boomeranging, you know, that process for me personally was quite interesting. And it wasn't like I was going to come back in a clear time frame, as I've mentioned. Like I had no idea. I knew that I'd performed. I knew that things were good and I left on a good note. And I just want to emphasize on that. I think when these things change, it's frustrating. You're like a deer in headlights and you're like, okay, but maybe I can get another job is the thinking, right? Maybe everything will be fine and it will return. And what I found in my story is I was just confronted with endless rejection, endless ghosting, endless hustle. Like, I've never hustled so hard in my life. Honestly, Alicia, it was pretty tough. And I think, like, I tried every single thing I could possibly do. Everything, you name it. I worked for free. I consulted on my own. I basically just did every single thing. I even transitioned to career coaching to some extent. You know, I did everything, and that got me through, actually. And I think the key problem is you don't know when, and that's the most challenging part. So you can't budget. You don't know how to, like, set expectations with people around you. There's a ton of ambiguity. So you need to have something to tie you through and tie you down during this period of time.
What did you do?
And
I mean, okay, so
yeah,
is that the consulting and the career coaching? Was that what it was for you? Yeah.
That's what it was for me. Yeah. I think I had to just have that conversation that people weren't hiring. And if they were, it was competing with a entourage of 200 billion people. You know, it wasn't really something I was going to, like, be successful at without. What I realized, if I compared the amount of email outreach or sending CVs or going through conversations with companies versus maybe opening up my own business and then converting that workload factor, which is exactly identical, by the way, it's just a different legal structure, then I was more successful doing that because the barrier to entry was less, because the overhead was less and the risk was less. And so that worked for me. So I had to do that. And so going for a job for two years was like not a thing. I stopped applying for jobs altogether because no point.
Oh my, this is going to be a ton that we need to talk about already. I need to understand more. I'm actually curious. I was just thinking about how there was a moment where I felt like there was a ton of HR function layoff happening, and it was all recruiters, talent acquisition, not so much, or maybe it was part of the later stage, it was the people, business partners. But do you think that that was during that moment of time during your layoff, and that now that cycle has kind of like ended, and now businesses are back to rehiring HR professionals? Do you think that is that a correct assessment?
I think that's a great question everyone would like an answer to. And there's so much more to that answer that I couldn't speak at it with huge authority. But what I could do is I could say that there's evidence. For example, the company I'm working with at the moment has been super empathetic, but also super successful in terms of positioning their business strategy and their business model to be profitable, and also to support headcount growth in a what we call a controlled offensive approach rather than a defensive approach, which we've seen before. So the strategy I sense, especially leading into 2024, is we've done our planning. Most companies have done their planning. And I sense that, similar to us, there's obviously some new things for the new year. And I think that this is an example of a company it's fixing a real problem. It's privately funded. It's not a publicly listed company. So it's certainly within that Series D category. I can sort of speak at the area that I feel that we're sort of addressing here, which is these nuanced, like, unicorns and growth companies that were laying off during that time. I feel like that's part of it, but also big tech. So there's the big tech conversation, and there's the growth and the investment piece. So there's a lot of different variables here. Alicia, it's hard for me to comment, but on a case-by-case basis, we're certainly growing. And it's interesting around the piece, how we sort of retained a lot of recruitment, like a skeleton crew and whatnot, but kept in relation with other recruiters that were really performing quite well. But again, generally, my experience in the past 18 months, as it's been the antithesis of that, I haven't seen, like, hey, let's go and, do a career in recruitment, like in the last 18 months, or hey, you want to start a business? Sure, probably not in recruitment, right? But if you had a lot of money, sure, it's a great place because there's still customers and recruiters going out of business. So yeah, great place if you've got lots of money. So I guess that's the way I'm going to answer the question.
Okay.
It's hard to speak a ton of data, but yeah, I think it's a great question. I feel like the market's more learned to the facts that we have more volatility. And so the structures and the strategies have been basically applied with a much more forward thinking approach. And I feel like that is probably the messaging with the market, I feel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know. I'm trying to see if you have the crystal ball that can look into the future and give everyone more hope that recovery is in sight. Because as we know, 2024 came out with a bang with more layoffs and more layoffs. And I'm trying to figure it out, like parse it out. Is it by function? Is it by, sector? Is it certain types of companies? But it's like everybody. It's really funny because in an episode to be released, not yet published, we did have a conversation around keeping yourself busy during your time of looking for a new job opportunity, but not only looking for a new job opportunity, that can really lead to burnout. So finding kind of a side hustle. I've got my podcast and I'm also doing some contract work. So tell us a little bit about your consulting side business during this time.
Sure, yeah, love to. So the first thing obviously is tech recruitment, but I found that was a little bit of a challenge and I had to pivot to actually working in Australia remotely because that market was a little bit more sort of stable. Even though it's connected with America, it was just a little bit more stable. So yeah, I consulted with clients on that. And that was a part of the revenue. But as you can appreciate, with tech recruitment, usually it's like big clumps of money that come through slowly. So especially when you're trying to do it at that time and so on. So I found that I still needed a sort of something to plug that gap and pay the bills. I think that's the problem. And so what I did is, I know this is kind of sound really interesting, like you probably wouldn't expect this, but I actually went on a language talking platform called italki. And this is kind of interesting. So italki, you actually get paid to talk with people, even to get an appointment, like you'll get paid, zero advertising cost. You just set up yourself on the platform and I'm not advocating for italki or anything. This was just like a very positively geared sort of way of getting revenue. And I started consulting to the Latin American market on how to communicate in the interview process, how to brand yourself in terms of the United States market, because the attractiveness of exchange rates in the US versus South America or Central America, there's a lot of value. And I uncovered a consulting market there and started just coaching engineers on how to basically position themselves. So all I was really doing is I was saying, okay, well, I've gone from placing engineers, but then there's a cutback on jobs. So what I'll do is I'll help them. There was a clear market definition of the problem is they were finding it hard to get opportunities. And yeah, it's also like sort of multiplied the challenge as well for them if they're in a country that doesn't necessarily speak English as its key language. It usually is the cultural and the communication barrier from them getting access to those better exchange rates and opportunities. So I started doing that and that got me through for 12 months. And then I hit a wall because I was absolutely burnt out. Going into that style of business, 8 hours a day consulting to engineers one-to-one, I was completely exhausted. So that was that piece. And then from there, I actually got to a point where my business took off and I could actually consult contract wise. And that enabled me to sort of get that linchpin. And then after that, the market started to pick up a little bit. And then after that, I had more maturity in the market. And then this opportunity popped up.
Incredible.
So that's how I got through. Yeah, that's how I got through. And it was like completely tough. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was easy. It was super tough, but I learned a lot. And I think to answer your question around keeping yourself busy. One of the things is I went back to my master's and I started studying data science, and maybe this might help understand also some of the other competitive forces like people are concerned about, which is the encroachment of AI. There's that whole conversation too. That also has some impact. There's a redistribution, I feel, of technology money. If you want to notice that, obviously Microsoft put quite a lot of money into OpenAI last year. It was one of the biggest rounds, et cetera, et cetera. You obviously can see that it's worth looking at. So I got into that, but not necessarily to become a technology expert, but just to enhance what I do and refocus my focus. And that gave me a little bit more marketability and value add returning, because I didn't come back just the way I was before. I actually had adapted and upskilled, and they had another reason to think about why I might be a more competitive candidate. And it gave me some versatility as well. Data science is very broad. So I took a strategy of being more broad, and I sensed that kept me busy intellectually, and it just enhanced my game. So that's like some tidbits of how I got through some of the things I did in my spare time. And yeah, I think you just have to recatalyze yourself. And what I mean by that is have to be open, I sense, to having a mindset of changing. The time which we had in 2021 is not now, and it may not be the case for some time. And that's just the reality of it. So there's no crystal ball and there's no silver bullet, is what I wanted to share.
Okay, that's a really good little soundbite.
You're welcome.
Wow, so that's actually quite a lot to take in, and I really want to make sure we also allocate time to hear about, what your advice is for job seekers. It sounds like there's a component of upskilling, but I love how you said there's two things I just want to call out. I love how you refer to your income as revenue. You really have that, you're like an entrepreneurial spirit. It's really funny. I can't wait to see what business you open and how it gets launched. But the other thing that you said, spare time. When you're between work and all your spare time, it's kind of like that's all the time you have is all spare. So I just thought that was a really funny thing. But interesting. So tell us about that data science upskilling. Like, that's not a thing that I don't think I would be able to just dive into, but it sounds like you have a little bit of a background on that side.
Yeah. So what's interesting right now is I'm working on I'm actually working with data scientists and heads of data science in this product company I'm working with. And they have a massive focus on data science and AI and all these great shiny objects, right? And this is great because I'm studying the same thing and I'm engaging with candidates like this as well as stakeholders, and I'm sitting there breaking down that. But that's a great asset to have. And yeah, it's absolutely challenge. I've come from a business background, and I sense that there is a time for adopting new technologies and things right now, especially. And if you think about recruitment, I'll touch on that, and then I'll touch on the next point around the company in itself and where I see the application for it. I think like if you look at recruiting and in general, it's a little bit like it hasn't been known for its innovation. Let's put it that way. I think with all due respect, there's some great things that it does and so on, but I think the only thing recruiting has produced independently is the CV. That was its thing. That was the innovation, a piece of paper with someone's experience on there. That's actually a fact. I researched it.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, so I actually was inspired to just go the opposite direction with it and say, okay, what can a recruiter do in terms of understanding data better, understanding, how to tell that story internally with stakeholders, how to really look at all this like vast amount of tooling and, overwhelming amount of learning curve for recruiters, and how to really like just get to the soul of it and say, okay, here's what it means for your organization in regards to how we see the future, or how we actually look at our productivity or unblock the teams, unblock all the cycle. It's very similar to sales cycles. You know, how do we understand how to maximize the data we have to be more productive and things like that. So it's talking about the past as well as talking about the future. And I sense that could be disruptive. And that was like part of my inspiration to go into that place. Instead of taking a traditional sort of business kind of degree or filling my time with creating some kind of business, particularly at the moment, I want to go into a different sort of realm and just see what's there. And I sense that, you know, we have so much data, it's not funny, just swimming around in recruitment circles. You think about, you've got a sales background as well, like how many emails or what sort of social media, like opportunities and data out there, you know, there's like all this ecosystem's ridiculous, but we don't understand it. We don't understand it enough, in my opinion. So I sense that like that's the motivator, and that's sort of what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm sort of like halfway through. So I'm certainly I'm no genius here. I'm just basically upskilling, learning more, and seeing what opportunities show up.
Yeah. And I can imagine, I was actually talking about how there is this new boom of HR technology incorporating AI. And so you're like an early adopter. And so you can understand this technology faster and absorb it and deploy it. You were ahead of the times, I think.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I appreciate the gesture.
I'm trying to find a piece of data that I read the other day about how data is going to like grow over the next 5 years, even like 2 years. I think it was like by 2026 it would more than double than the amount of data that we currently parse in our day-to-day lives, which I think is like insane. And you know, I don't think about HR in line with data science, but you're really opening my mind to that right now. So it's really cool.
Happy to do that. Yeah, it's like just that was my thinking. It's like, what do you do, you know, with this whole AI phenomenon? What do you do? Become an electrician or something? For me, it was like, we just need to, it's just a prompt to learn more, understand how it's a productivity tool. Yeah, you can either adopt it or choose not to. I just chose to. And that was the idea. I think that's exciting. You'll be surprised how easy it is to learn things now with a little AI copilot. You can learn a coding language super fast. You get the hints. It's like you've got someone who's very good at what they do, especially at a basic level anyway, to get you moving. So that, you know, the opportunities I would encourage to go there if you're in recruiting or sales or anything like that. You're curious, like, hey, how do I develop my skill set? That would be something I feel like could really help. Yeah, for sure.
I think it's funny that you say you can either adopt it or not. The world is moving forward with AI without everybody else. Like you have to.
Yeah,
there is
absolutely.
no option. You have to get on board with this because it's the way. It is the way of the future now, right?
The way of the future. Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Something that just crossed my mind that we need to talk about, because a lot of the times for people who are looking to break into companies and get noticed, we talk about how resumes are not enough because resumes are just getting read by the ATS AI and going into a pile of yeses or nos, and there's no person. So tell us, is that true? What is actually happening when you submit your resume?
Yeah.
What is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So from my side, there's no AI being utilized, but you know, if you have a company that does that, I'd be questioning a number of things. It depends on the tool. It depends on who's using it. It depends on a lot of parameters there. So, but from my side, what our problem is like a really positive challenge, which is we have lots of candidates. So our challenge is to be able to get through them and deal with them appropriately. And that's the challenge. So yeah, I think this might connect on marketability. Generally, I think the catalyst for moving forward is, moving away from the CV mindset. Yeah, it's old school. It's very much just a document that can be communicating internally through a process. It's not necessarily the answer. And it's funny because I bump into candidates every day and they might be laid off or whatever it is. I was talking to a guy the other day, great candidate, you know, wouldn't have been able to talk to him if it wasn't this market condition, he was laid off after 10 years at a certain company, a big, well-known company. And he put his CV across, and he thought it was all, he had it, like that was it. And got his CV, and off we go. And yeah, it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Great candidate and everything, but just the expectation was that it was a market that obviously had challenges, but wasn't exposed to those kinds of dynamics. And I think that it's, again, a mindset where you want to look at it by not taking it personally. If someone ghosts you or they don't come back to you, too bad for them, right? That's how I see it. I think trying to move on quickly is the idea, rather than sort of getting caught up in, these sorts of back and forth. If the opportunity doesn't necessarily like move forward and progress, then it's not an opportunity. And that's all I want to message is it's just the quickest thing you can do is just understand that and focus on things that differentiate you. Like, for example, how marketable are you? And what value add can you show in your marketability? That might be a unique piece there, where it's not just about using blanketed terms like personal branding. You need to be able to be visible, but is your visibility recognized? And that's a question to maybe ask. And then your CV and your LinkedIn and all these things will actually have the sort of footfall that they deserve, because they certainly do. And like, I have some amazing people in my pipelines. We're coming to points where everybody is good and we want to offer them all. And making that decision is more the challenge. So yeah, it's great, but it's also concerning as a recruiter. How do you add value if like everybody that's going through the process is good?
That's
it's like
funny.
Another question in itself.
That is wild, because I like the conversation having recently was like, it's so hyper competitive that companies, the one that we posted today, I published today, companies they can get the very best candidate with a hyper specific background in specifically your product or a competitor's product that and you've had 10 years of experience in it. So the market is skewed towards the companies that are hiring, and definitely not the people who are looking for work. And so I feel like a little bit boo-hoo, poor you. You have so many wonderful candidates. Like, oh
yeah,
man,
yeah,
that's funny.
Absolutely. So I think like if you can think about it as like a recruiter, as a candidate, I think that would be helpful. And I think that's why you're asking the question, Alicia, is that we don't necessarily sit there and say, is this candidate's CV formatted perfectly? We just don't have time to make that judgment sometimes. So if you think about it, the emphasis, and all the CV writers won't like me for saying this, but the emphasis is really not having the best CV. It's nice, but who's to say that it's actually going to be seen? And I think the hack here is just realizing that and really thinking about how do you actually get your CV seen by the right person, which then opens up a whole group of other sort of actions. I think that's the best way to put it, right? So sort of like you need to think about, okay, do I really apply for this company? Right? Is this really going to be a company that aligns with my industry background, my strengths, my skills? Have I really read through everything there, or am I just like spamming company hoping? So I think like start there. And I always think of it this way, is like, it's always like a recruiting process. There is good quality candidates or data points that you put in a process. You usually have a very flawless output, which is a hire and the right one. And I think it's the same for candidates. If you think about it scientifically, well, where exactly are you putting your data? And then have a think about that, because if you're not picking the exact alignment at this time, it's not 2021. You need to be really specific about who you apply for, what companies, and how you do it. So I just want to emphasize on one thing, is the relationship, the networking impact here. This is where it really pays off, and it's nothing new. I'm sure everyone's saying this, but it's so true, is looking at the roads you've been down and really working those in the past. I think that's the biggest thing. It's so much easier than building a new bridge. So much easier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. That's really helpful. And I think that that will help people to just get super focused so that they're not getting so burnt out. So I think the story is break up your time into thirds. Spend time upskilling, spend time being super hyper focused on where you're putting your energy and your job search. And then the last one is like make sure that you're having fun and networking and think about a business that you might be able to spin up for no dollars.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just to echo your point there, this is an opportunity, if you see it, to definitely start from zero and embrace, like, potentially have a go at a business, have a go at your own consulting gig. Like, great time. What do you got to lose? So in that sense, you have no other option. It's either you do that or you don't. And as I seem to keep on saying in this conversation, it's really just a binary decision, in my opinion. There's options there, and that's one for sure. So exciting in that sense, right?
Yes, exciting, scary, but at the same time.
And scary, yeah, of course.
Everybody's just trying to figure it out. So I just have one more question before we run out of time, which actually already happened, and we're on a new Zoom. But we hear a lot about people reaching in to everybody within the organization, including the hiring manager, the recruiting teams, TA, HR, business partners. What's your opinion? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you hate it?
Yeah, okay. I won't say I hate it, but I don't like it.
Oh,
and the reason is, the reason is that there's application protocols, and I don't want to sound like a classic HR person or anything like that, because I'm not. But there's so much room to have the wrong branding image from a company standpoint if you don't follow those. So if we're getting bombarded with messages just from the traditional routes, and then you take the other opportunity, what do you think everyone else is going to do? They're all doing that. And so it just creates more risk from a employment branding perspective, because there's something that's going to get missed or misinterpreted. And it just adds more fuel to the fire, and I think the biggest thing I've learned is just the expectation setting with people, and especially candidates in the process, needs to be really soft handled, especially at the moment. And so this sort of approach allows some kind of like misinterpretation to potentially happen. There's a ton of things that can go wrong with that. I'm talking from a recruiter perspective. That's constructively why I feel there's it probably puts the applicant at a disadvantage, as well as the organization. So
interesting.
That's my view.
Interesting. Yeah. Marketing ourselves, we need to make sure that we look attractive, but we don't bombard the hiring teams, and we stand out in a way that's respectful, sounds like. Yeah,
that's exactly right. I guess this is my message, is attract, don't chase.
Interesting. Okay. I know that we are totally out of time. Thanks so much. And it was great chatting with you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Likewise. Thanks.
That's been today's episode of TechRect. If you or someone you know wants to be on the show, please email techrectpodcast@gmail.com and we'll get it scheduled. See you next time.